This is your daily dose of all things royal.
After months of searching through intelligence community holdings and files, today I'm releasing new evidence of long-standing U.S. government funding of more than 120 biolabs in over 30 countries. Now, these biolabs include labs in places like Ukraine, which could be at risk of compromise due to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. In fact, the intelligence community had previously warned that a U.S.-funded biolab in Ukraine likely housed dangerous pathogens and remained vulnerable to long-standing threats of Russian attack, seizure, or damage. Now, until now, evidence regarding the full existence and funding of these laboratories had been knowingly withheld from you, the American people. Many of these U.S. government-funded biolabs are currently or have previously engaged in research using hazardous and highly contagious pathogens, and in some cases included dangerous gain-of-function research with very little visibility or oversight. Now, President Trump clearly understands the serious threat dangerous gain-of-function research poses to the American people. And this is why he took decisive action over a year ago. On May 25th, 2025, he signed an executive order to end federal funding of gain-of-function research around the world. Here at ODNI, I issued new guidance to the intelligence community directing increased collection on these laboratories and facilities overseas. And we're already seeing the results of this increased collection. We're learning new details, for example, on clinical trials that are underway at these facilities and that are raising significant ethical, financial, and security concerns regarding the supposed public health initiatives and U.S. national security. Now, despite the obvious potential for catastrophic global impact that research on dangerous pathogens in biolabs can have, politicians and so-called health professionals like Dr. Fauci, as well as entities within the Biden administration's national security team, lied repeatedly to the American people about the existence of U.S.-funded and supported biolabs. Not only did they lie, they threatened those who attempted to expose the truth. So this release today breaks new ground, as the information surrounding the existence, history, locations, and funding of these U.S.-funded biolabs has been intentionally covered up by very powerful people who falsely claimed that these biolabs didn't exist. Now, they accuse anyone who says otherwise to be foreign assets and traitors to America. Now, ODNI will continue working closely with partners across the U.S. government to identify exactly where these labs are and what pathogens they contain to end dangerous gain-of-function research that threatens the health and well-being of the American people and people around the world.
So now this photo just became more concerning. This is the 8th time the globalist king has met with Zelensky. But we're supposed to assume that the royal family is not political. Okay, don't switch the channel yet. You might not like what I have to say, but you definitely need to hear it. So these are the declassified documents that Tulsi released. And on the surface, it sounds harmless, animal disease research. But here in this document, it makes it very clear this place that they're focused on was sitting on some serious pathogens like anthrax and Brucella bacteria, the kind that just don't stay in animals. These are bioweapons. They can jump to humans and cause real damage like what we saw conveniently during the COVID-19 pandemic. So here is what they're actually admitting. This lab particularly had old ties going back to the Soviet era, possibly even Soviet biological weapons work from the 1920s. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. spent years and a lot of our money through something called the Biological Threat Reduction Program, trying to help Ukraine secure and destroy these dangerous materials so they didn't end up in the wrong hands. So according to this document, even after all that help, as late as 2019, the lab still had major biosafety problems where they weren't handling and storing these dangerous bacteria properly. And then when Russia invaded in 2022, apparently the Ukrainian authorities ordered these labs to destroy their pathogen collections. But who really thinks they did that, right? basically in efforts to stop Russia from getting their hands on them. But Russia, of course, then starts screaming for years that the U.S. was running biological weapons programs out of these labs, including claims of work happening in a basement at this specific facility. And of course, what did we get from the deep state over the last couple of years whenever people talked about this? Oh, that's Russian disinformation. This document itself confirms that there is indeed a virology building that has a basement level and confirms the lab was holding hundreds of pathogens and had real security weaknesses. So the reason why this matters is because you've got live, dangerous pathogens that can infect humans and cause another pandemic, mass, crisis again. And it's admitting that there's safety failures in the midst of a war zone. But that's not what I'm worried about. Do you remember when Zelensky came to the Oval Office last year and he made that threat?
And when he will go there, if we will not stay, you will fight. Your American soldiers, it doesn't matter, do you have ocean or not, your soldiers will fight.
Mr. President, would you be willing to visit Ukraine, maybe Kyiv or Odessa, which is known to be at the riviera or Black Sea?
It was my question.
I'm sorry.
I don't want to talk about Odessa now. Let's not talk about Odessa.
Now I get it. Maybe the reason why Trump didn't want to talk about Odessa is because of the lab that's housing the biological weapons. Now, mind you, this is right after Zelensky just got done saying that it doesn't matter that there's an ocean between the two countries. America's still going to have to fight. Oh, really? Now this takes on a whole new perspective, knowing that these biolabs exist. And the thing that's so messed up here is that the United States is the one responsible for being the primary backer and funding in building out these 40 labs in Ukraine with the assistance of these organizations that you see here on the left, which includes the World Health Organization and the FAO, otherwise known as the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And we'll get into that and how it ties to the UK. Shockingly, but not shockingly. These are the organizations that helped set up and the contractors that took taxpayer money to build out these labs. And now we're in this pickle where could potentially be used against now America. That's just my opinion. Especially since American taxpayers don't want to give any more money to fund this never-ending war, to line pockets of these globalist elites. We just don't want to do it anymore. We see what's going on. Yeah, we should be very concerned that the World Health Organization had their hands all over this, especially now since Ebola is running rampant in Africa right after the United States completed its exit out of the World Health Organization. While King Charles meets with Zelensky for the 8th time, the UK and much of the EU still show zero serious interest in ending this war. They keep the weapons flowing, the money flowing, and the diplomatic cover flowing. You have to ask why. So when we look at what the declassified documents actually show, right? The United States built and supported over 40 laboratories across Ukraine. These labs stored Soviet-era biological weapons pathogens. They held anthrax, plague, Ebola, highly pathogenic avian flu, and African swine fever. And the American taxpayer funded it, especially the Ukrainian scientists who were paid to sequence the genomes of these dangerous viruses inside these biocontainment labs, right? Now, when you look at this map, it shows how these exact Ukrainian institutions, the veterinarian institutes, the anti-plague institutes, the epidemiology centers, sit inside King Charles's global network. At the top, you have King Charles here and his Sustainable Markets Initiative. Remember, I covered that. If you didn't see that video, please go back and revisit so you understand what I'm talking about. That flows directly down into the One Health framework. The World Health Organization, the FAO, and the whole sustainability and biodiversity agenda he spent years pushing. The same categories of Ukrainian labs doing pathogen work under U.S. contracts are the same types of institutions that generate the data and research feeding into Charles's One Health and Sustainable Food Systems vision, okay? Nothing anymore is a coincidence. This is how they all tie together. This is institutional overlap at scale, right? When we're looking at this whole globalist vision. Now, if you haven't noticed, and I think more so over the last several years since the Queen passed away, we're seeing the royal family position themselves more as global leaders rather than sticking to their realms and focusing on the people that they serve. Especially King Charles, he positions himself as a global champion of climate, biodiversity, regenerative agriculture, and integrated health systems. He's all for this digital ID, folks. The war in Ukraine has kept those Ukrainian institutions inside the Western orbit, locked into the very frameworks Charles promotes. While the fighting continues here, the data keeps flowing, the collaborations keep happening, and the influence over those labs and research networks stays in the hands of the same global governance structures. That's why this is so dangerous. In theory, the UK and EU could have pushed for a negotiated end like 3 years ago, but they chose not to. They could have cut off the endless weapons pipeline, but instead they keep Zelensky propped up meeting after meeting while Charles himself keeps the personal diplomacy going, 8 times and counting, and was willing to throw away the U.S. special relationship over being irritated by how Trump treated Zelensky that day in the Oval Office. You can see where the priorities lie. So these documents prove the labs were real. The pathogens were real. The U.S. contractor involvement was real. And the genome work on dangerous viruses was also real. This visual here shows how those institutions connect directly into the One Health and Sustainability networks King Charles has made his signature cause. And while that infrastructure remains contested territory in an act of war, the British monarchy and its European partners show no urgency to bring the conflict to a close. Now, is it because they don't want the United States going in and shutting down those labs? That could be a possibility, because in itself, those labs could be used as weapons, especially in carrying out another pandemic or infecting another country's food supply. That's what makes this all so dangerous. We see how these manufactured crises that keep popping up with the same people who just magically have the solution to be able to help with their philanthropy. And it's all geared towards this one world vision that these globalists have been so hell-bent on forcing onto the population. Clearly, it's not working, but they don't care. The more death and destruction, the better for them. For all of those that think King Charles is not political, let me ask you this one question. He has now met with Zelensky 8 times. What do you think they talk about? Do you think King Charles is talking about how climate change has affected the weather in Ukraine? For a guy who everybody says has no power or political influence because they don't weigh in on political matters, I sure would like to know why Zelensky keeps on coming back to Charles. Is he walking out with bags of cash? What else is there? How many conversations can you have about the weather? I'm joking, obviously, but, on a more serious note, you can understand why this matters. And considering how our relationship has been deteriorating with the UK and EU over our view on a free society, we want to be free and the EU and UK don't. You can see how this becomes a little unsettling. At what point do we say that they're no longer allies, but now enemies, considering they have this going on in Ukraine? And we'd be really stupid to think that King Charles doesn't know anything about these 40 labs in Ukraine. Even more dangerous is the potential of Harry knowing about these labs in Ukraine. Why do you think he keeps going back there? Obviously, something's going on. I don't necessarily think it's associated with the labs, but you look at Halo Trust, and what do? They clear mines in war-torn areas, especially now in Ukraine. What if they have something to do as well with these labs? As of today, there's nothing on record that says the Halo Trust dabbles in cleaning up bioweapons, but who knows, right? Who knows with these organizations? You can't trust these people. You just can't. After going through this journey these last 5 years, it truly has been an awakening for me. I don't think I'll ever look at the royal family the same way again. Part of me is really angry about what was allowed to go on with Harry and Meghan and the harm that they caused to innocent people. And the fact that the royal family has done absolutely nothing to stop them Yeah, you can't help but be frustrated. But, I'm not going to put the blame all on the royal family. The United States has some accountability here, too. Like, how would they allow this guy to continue to keep doing what he's been doing here for these past 6 years? Infringing on American civil rights is beyond me. And I think that's the most frustrating thing out of all of this, especially, doing it while exploiting our veterans. That, I think, is the biggest slap in the face. At this point, I think it's really in God's hands now as to what justice will come down to these people. Obviously, they are pretty much untouchable, but God definitely has a plan. We just have to stay in faith and trust that good will prevail over this evil right now. That's all we can do. I think something does need to be done about this ASAP because I don't trust these people anymore. I really don't. Especially after what we're witnessing and watching unfold here. One way or another, all these people are connected. This is not a conspiracy theory. Like, it's all out there now. But I would love to know what you think about this. Definitely let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.